Lorcana's new triple deck constructed format isn't just a format. It's a puzzle, a thought experiment, and in many ways, a pressure cooker. It requires each player to play 2 different games before they draw their first card. Overall, this format is bonkers, and I really want to talk about it. When we talk about a typical Lorcana tournament, I like to say that there's a game before the game, and that first game is the deck building phase. It's when you're trying to figure out what exactly you're going to bring to the tournament to tackle a specific meta. You know the type of opponents that are going to be there, you know the size of the field, you know what the meta's like, and so you try to craft your deck to tackle that particular moment. In Triple Deck Constructed, this is still the first of 3 games that you're going to play, except deck building is compounded, because instead of building 1 deck, you're going to build 3. In Triple Deck Constructed, as the name suggests, you're going to bring 3 different decks to the tournament, but the 3 decks have to follow a very specific rule. Your lineup has to have each of the 6 ink colors represented, which means you can use each ink color exactly 1 time. Now, when you do the math on this, with 6 ink colors, that means that there's 15 different possibilities. Of course, not all of these are created equal in terms of raw power. Of course, for Worlds and in a few weeks, the meta is going to be very different after Reign of Jafar comes out, but we don't know exactly yet what that's going to do, so we'll go with what we know. Using the Arcasia's Island meta, I assigned each ink pair a score of 1 to 5 based on its relative strength. When you do this, you see that some 3 deck lineups clearly stand out. For example, your strongest lineup is probably Amber Steel, Emerald Amethyst, and Ruby Sapphire. Now, these are all really solid ink pairings that you can tailor different ways and would be a great lineup for a triple deck constructed tournament. For another strong lineup, you could bring in the ever-powerful Ruby Sapphire with Amethyst Steel and round it out with a Chernodog's build of Emerald Amber. But to illustrate the point that some of these lineups aren't terribly good, at the other end of the table, you have combinations such as Amethyst Emerald paired with Ruby Steel and Amber Sapphire. There are so many more decisions that you need to make during the deck building phase. Not only are you trying to craft each individual deck perfectly, but you need to consider how bringing in a favorite deck, one that you really want to play, will affect your other 2 choices. You also need to consider how each of the decks that you build complement each other, and we'll talk about that later. It's so much more challenging and so much more fun to think about all the different possibilities and how each player is going to tackle this particular format. So that's the first game you're playing, crafting your lineup and picking all of the different cards you're going to bring into this tournament. The second game begins when you sit down at the table across from your opponent. At this point, 3 things happen. First, you get to review your opponent's deck list to see exactly what they've brought to the table. Second, you and your opponent decide who goes first. And third, each player secretly selects an ink color to ban from their opponent's lineup, effectively winnowing their 3 decks down to 2. Now, this ban decision is so insanely important. You could win or lose the match based on this specific decision. Why do you choose to ban a specific deck? It could be because it's the deck that you pair into the worst based on your given lineup. For example, let's say you've brought a list of very aggressive, fast decks. You may choose to ban Steel from your opponent's lineup because that's the color that'll counter your strategy the best. You could just pick the best deck. In the current meta, Ruby Sapphire is widely considered to be the most powerful, and maybe you just get rid of it because you don't want to deal with it. You could also pick the deck that your opponent is known for, the one that they play the best or have the most experience with. And importantly, the ban is the first part of the mental game that you're playing with your opponent. It's your first chance to really send a message, to indicate to them perhaps what your strategy is, to try to influence their decision about what to play in game 1, which we'll talk about for a moment. It's incredibly important. The ban is going to set the trajectory for the entire rest of the match. And all of this that happens when you sit down at the table is what I call the second game. It's where you look at your opponent's lists, you figure out who's going to go first, you pick which deck you're going to ban, you assess your remaining options after your opponent bans one of yours, and then you secretly select which deck you want to play first. If all of this has gone right and you've influenced your opponent's decisions and you've set things up properly, you're going to go into game 1 with a favorable matchup, looking to take the momentum from your opponent and ride it to victory. You may be one of the best and most skilled Lorcana players in the world in an actual Lorcana match when you're playing the game. But if you don't do those first 2 games properly, the deck building and then that first phase when you sit down at the table, you will lose. You will lose even before you draw a card. And that's what makes this format so mind-boggling and fascinating and fun to me, but also why it requires so much skill. Yes, in a typical Lorcana event, you have that first phase, that deck building phase, where you're trying to pick the specific 60 cards which are going to give you the best chance of success. Here, that decision is amplified and compounded during the deck building phase. Now that we know how each match is run and that one of your decks is going to be banned, consider what that means. Yes, there is a course of action where you bring in the 3 most powerful decks in a specific format, if you can pair them all properly. The 3 decks that are the most consistent. And to be honest, that's probably the course of action that a lot of players are going to take. But think about what that means. Let's say that that lineup breaks down where you have a very control-heavy heavy deck like Ruby Sapphire, and then you have on the other end decks that are more aggressive or more mid-range. You're setting yourself up so that your opponent can ban your one control deck, perhaps leaving them with a favorable matchup into your other two decks. So there's other courses of action you could take where you choose to go with a very aggressive lineup, or perhaps you choose to go with a very control-heavy lineup. Maybe you're saying, hey, I love playing control, so I'm going to put myself in a scenario where my opponent can't ban my only control deck. And then perhaps you lay some traps for your opponent. Perhaps you bring in a really weird off-meta deck that your opponent doesn't understand, perhaps baiting them into banning that deck so they don't have to play the unknown. Or perhaps you do the opposite and you put in a really powerful deck, the most consistent deck in the meta, let's say Ruby Sapphire again, hoping your opponent bans that, leaving you with your other two preferred decks. There are mind games that go into just building your deck lists. And then when you sit down at the table, you are already playing your opponent even before the first game begins. Your choice about what to ban sends a message. You're already starting to influence your opponent's choices. Perhaps you're sending a message to your opponent about what you're scared of, or perhaps you're trying to tell them exactly what type of match you're trying to shape. All of this matters. And the last thing, your choice of which deck to play in the first match is also critical. Going into the first game, you already know whether you're going to play or draw first, so you get to pick which of your remaining decks gives you the best edge. But you also perhaps have an inkling about what your opponent is going to play based on their remaining decks and based on whether they're going to play or draw first. So perhaps you pick the deck that counters your opponent's deck the best. These are all decisions that come into play. It's all crazy. So I've talked about Triple Deck Constructed in terms of 3 separate games that are being played, but I want to give you one more way to think about it if you're going to watch Worlds, because I just think it's fun. Let's think of it as a 5-act play. First act is the prelude, where each player figures out which tools they're going to bring to the tournament. The second act is the ban. This is the first twist that raises the stakes and sets the stage for everything that follows. It's also the first move that you make against your opponent. The third act is the setup, where each player reveals which deck they're going to play in game 1 and then plays the game. The fourth act is the counter. This is game 2, where the losing player gets to select which deck they want to use to try to counter their opponent's momentum and to force a game 3. And finally, you have the finale, the climax. This is game 3, where all of the choices made in the previous 4 acts all come to a head for one final game. This 5-act story, the prelude, the ban, the setup, the counter, and the finale will be told over and over again during Disney Lorcana Worlds, and I can't wait to watch it. And as the title of this video suggests, that's the way you choose to think about these matches. It means that Worlds has already started. Script is already being written. The players are already trying to figure out which tools they're going to bring to the tournament. They're playtesting, and the stage is already being set right now for the games that'll be played out in a month's time. So what do you all think of the Triple Deck Constructed format? Which 3 decks would you bring to Disney Lorcana Worlds? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tune in to the first Disney Lorcana World Championship on June 28th and June 29th. I'll see you all on the stream.